Hi, welcome everybody. I want to thank you for joining me this evening, and I thought it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about anxiety and managing anxiety. So that's going to be the goal for tonight is to talk a little bit about what anxiety is and the anxiousness that we feel, which is very much a normalized reaction to stress and stressors that we have. And we'll also end tonight with a very brief 4 or 5 minute self guided meditation that I think will be very helpful. And I just want to, before we start, say and acknowledge that right now we are living in stressful times, and it can be quite unnerving to feel the unknowns, which many of us are experiencing now. But it's also very helpful to know that we can come back to a place that is both grounding and that helps us to eliminate a lot of the anxiety and anxiousness that we might feel. So let's start a little bit with an overview of what anxiety is and what anxiety is not. And as I mentioned earlier, anxiety is very much a normalized reaction, feeling to stressors. It can, in fact, be very helpful and motivating for us to experience some form of anxiety. For example, if we are doing public speaking, we might have a sense of anxiousness or nervousness around speaking to a group of people. We also might have an exam, or we might be waiting for a particular outcome of something, and that can create a sense of nervousness or anxiety for us. So, in some ways, anxiety is a necessary motivator. When it becomes an issue is when the anxiety is long lasting. And what we mean by long lasting is that it has direct impacts on our daily living and our daily life. And so, what happens when we begin to feel anxious is it's sort of a feedback loop that goes upon itself. So, we might feel anxious, and we might then question, why am I so anxious? Um, why am I feeling anxious about whatever it might be? And these feelings then can continue to drive the thoughts about anxiety. And so we have this loop that occurs where we feel anxiety, feel anxious. We think about, why am I feeling anxious? What's causing this anxiety or anxiousness? And this feeling and thought just kind of goes into a circle or a loop. And over long periods of time, that's when we can experience impacts on our daily living, on our what is called our frame of reference, which is basically our sense of self that can be impacted. And if this sense of self is impacted to the point where it causes us to, in some instances, relive the anxiety or the anxious feelings or periods of anxiety, then that obviously has detrimental effects for us. So, particularly in times of anxiety or anxiousness or nervousness or feelings of the unknown or unanticipated, um, it's actually very helpful for us to acknowledge that these feelings of anxiety and anxiousness are quite normal. They're things that motivate us to do things or to avoid things. Um, and so typically what we find is that we might be anxious or feel anxiety about a few things. And so there's what's called the anxious dozen that I'd like to go over with you. Uh, and so Perhaps you've experienced one or more of these areas in which you have felt anxious or nervous. So the anxious doesn't. The first is seeking reassurance. We might be seeking that from a loved one or companion or from a person in authority, our boss or our boss's boss. And so we may have a space in us in which we want to be reassured that things are going to be okay, or that in we're going to be able to complete the task that we're given. So seeking reassurance can create anxiety or anxiousness for us. Um, Trying to stop thoughts can create anxiety, believe it or not. So we might have a sense of anxiety or anxiousness, and we might have that as a thought, and we try to stop it. I can't feel this way, or I can't think this way, and why is this happening? And so you can see how that can create a loop, uh, a thought loop, what's called a rumination, when we continually think over and over as to the thoughts that we're having. Um, we might have anxiety over collecting information. So we might have an anxious thought, and then we begin to start to collect as much information as we can about that anxious thought. And so this becomes a revolving door as well too. We collect information, that information creates anxiety for us, and on and on and on. Number four, checking things over and over can create anxiousness or anxiety for us. Avoiding discomfort. Sometimes we don't want to hear that bad news, or we don't want to know that there perhaps might be something that can impact us. And so we avoid it. We avoid appointments. We avoid talking to others. We avoid our boss. We avoid social situations. And this can also be quite difficult. And you can imagine how over time this can create discomfort. Using negative coping can be a form of anxiety. So, numbing out with food, alcohol, drugs, or other things, the internet, being on a constant loop in terms of watching or looking for information can be anxiety provoking as well too. Number seven, over preparing. How can that be anxiety provoking? We might want to have things so structured and so in order that when things are not structured or in order, we feel anxious. And life really is a bunch of unknowns. And as much as we do want to plan and try to plan around our life, it is important for us to know that sometimes the best laid plans don't often go well. Using superstitious or magical behaviors. Now, there can be some cultural significance to this in terms of how our behaviors might be helpful for us, but it isn't quite helpful to try to put all our eggs into one basket, or to try to um, utilize things that may not make much sense to us in trying to quell our anxieties. Trying to make a good impression is number nine, may cause anxiety. Ruminating thoughts, we talked about, continually playing this feedback loop where we have thoughts and anxiety around these thoughts. Demanding certainty. Many times life is an unknown. And when we try to have a specificity about things, that specificity may backfire. Refusing to accept the fact that you have random thoughts or that we feel anxiety. So these, what is called the anxious dozen, any of those can be what we experience from day to day. So how can we manage anxiety? Well, one of the ways in which we can do this, which is a very, very helpful way, is for us to be in tune and to have awareness. And I'll be doing a separate session on mindfulness and mindfulness practice fairly soon, but we can practice a form of mindfulness that it can help us to have that sense of grounding and have that sense of things will be okay. And so, what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just to do a guided meditation. And you can do this, your eyes closed or open, whatever you'd like. Make sure you're in a comfortable space. And now imagine that you are near a body of water. Take a deep breath. We want to inhale through our nose, exhale through our mouth. Again, inhale, exhale. And we want to have a sense of serenity and peacefulness as we imagine ourselves in a state of peace and calm. And we can use the waves to guide us, almost in our breath as well. Inhaling, exhaling. And as we begin to focus on our breath, it's not so much that we're clearing our mind, because that's difficult to do, but it's helping us to refocus and reframe on what's happening now. That we are present now, we are well, and the fact that when we focus on our breath, can bring us a great sense of comfort. Inhaling and exhale. And as we practice more and more, we can come to this place of serenity and calmness at any time that we choose. When we have anxious thoughts, we can return to the breath, and it can help guide us and help us make sense of things that might seem uncertain, of questions that we don't have answers to yet. And ultimately, it brings us to a state of awareness and calm. So that was just a few minutes, and I wanted to just give you a few seconds also to think about how perhaps you felt, and you welcome to, in the comments below, give some feedback as to how this was helpful for you or not. And just remember that you can always return to your breath as a way of managing how you feel, managing your thoughts, managing your feelings of anxiety, and creating awareness for yourself, and ultimately creating a sense of empowerment, which is what we do when we feel that we've lost a sense of who we are, a sense of what we expect, a sense of what is to come. We've actually lost some power. But when we employ things such as focus on breath, we can regain and empower ourselves. So thank you for joining me. Hopefully, see you all tomorrow evening. Have a great evening.